Having identified a difference between feeling certain and being right, and noting the problems that follow from that, um, Donovan then goes on to say, talk about the intuitions that Owen and so on held to be so reliable. He says, well, even in these cases, there are significant differences. In the first place, it ain't quite the case that intuitions regarding other people, for instance, are so reliable. We can easily be mistaken, we can easily be confused. And he quotes Bertrand Russell with a very kind of useful example of we might feel certain that we are with someone who is in love with us, whom we love, and so on, and be wrong. Quite often, these sorts of things are occurring. And how many people can you think of that have said, "Oh yes, he loves me. Oh yes, she loves me. It's certain," and it turns out that they don't. This is not at all unusual. And Russell concludes by saying sometimes the slower, more groping methods of the intellect are more reliable. By this he means, experience, time. It's slower and more groping insofar as it feels sometimes like you're in the dark, but you know, ultimately it's likely to be more reliable, much more reliable than an intuition. So, it isn't the case that, intuitions regarding other persons are quite as safe as Owen supposes that they are. But there are further differences as well. Because when we think about our intuitions regarding perception or our intuitions regarding other persons, we find that actually those sorts of intuitions are supported by large amounts of widely agreed upon knowledge. For instance, my intuition regarding other persons is supported in the first instance by a huge amount of knowledge regarding their physiology, their neurology, their psychology. There are all sorts of things that we know about persons, and we know very well and very confidently. If we go to a variety of textbooks about physiology, we will find they're all in agreement about, that we're made of bones and flesh and so on. And similarly, if we look at books on neurology, we'll find very similar sorts of things about synapses and neural pathways and other things that I don't really understand. And finally, psychology. There's some differences of opinion within psychology, but there's a huge amounts of agreement of opinion in relation to this. So, we have kind of huge amounts of widely agreed upon knowledge. And secondly, in relation to other people, I also have a massive argument from analogy from myself. If I kind of see somebody behaving in a certain way, I can ask myself, well, when do I behave that way? Okay, under these circumstances, well, it's likely then that the person is having the same sort of experience. And again, this is easily gained and widely agreed upon. So, our intuitions regarding other persons and perception are supported by huge amounts of widely agreed upon knowledge, which interestingly is exactly what religious experiences and religion do not have. If there's one thing that's characteristic of religion, it's the fact that they often disagree. There's an old and rather poor joke, if you put let me get it right, if you put two Baptists in a room, you'll get three opinions. Now, it's not a very funny joke, but what it does indicate is that religious believers often find things to disagree about, and it's very easy to kind of just look around the world and look at religious believers and look at the wide range of disagreements. Now, the point that's at stake here is just simply to say that, Owen has put all his kind of stake on religious experiences, religious intuitions being similar to other reliable intuitions, and it turns out that they're not as similar as Owen supposes. It's really a variation on J.L. Mackey's argument from disanalogy, to say that we cannot form analogies between religious experiences and regular experiences. They're simply too different. There are too many dissimilarities. Owen has tried to form a relationship between religious intuitions and regular intuitions. And Donovan has said, but they're simply not the same. They're too different. Consequently, we cannot hold them as being equally reliable. This sort of argument simply doesn't hold.